Hello and welcome to the 6 Plus show, a podcast for your wargaming and 40k needs. Hobby talk, tactics, tournament reports, lore and much more. We have it all. Please welcome your host for the evening, Tom.
Welcome, ladies, gentlemen, and Alaris Terminators to that 6 Plus show. I am your host, Tom, and I am joined today by a very special guest. I've got the one and only Jamie Balcombe. How are you doing, Jamie?
Well, thanks. Yeah, how are you doing?
I am very good, yes. I've been looking forward to this.
Yeah.
I'm trying to get it scheduled. Obviously, we chatted at the Teams event, and we've been very keen to make this ever since. I'm really pleased that we're sitting down today. And I understand this is your first podcast experience. So
it is. I'm excited, It's an exclusive contract.
Yeah, yeah, we've got the rights. That's good fun. So obviously, this for the uneducated, this is state of play. So what we're going to be doing today is focusing in on a particular faction. I get a faction expert, someone who knows the faction inside out, to come and chat about sort of the state of their army at this moment in time and their history with it and the overall sort of place of this army in the meta as well. And today we're going to be talking about the Custodes, who are obviously the golden boys, very shiny, very elite, and an army that Jamie has more than a little bit of experience, because my understanding is that you finished number one in the world for Custodes last year.
Yeah, very kind of you. As you say, yeah, I was fortunate enough to end up top of the ITC for Custodes as well as the UKTC last year.
Yeah, absolutely amazing. I think that is not an easy thing to do ever. You're fighting up against a whole bunch of players, and you have to put in good showings at some of the biggest and scariest events in the world. And that culminated for you in Vegas this year, didn't it?
It did. So yeah, I was I went to Vegas in the end of January this year, and that was a really cool experience, and got to play some really cool new people over in America. And then, of course, that sort of sealed the deal in terms of I went into that as number one, and that sealed the deal of staying there and got to pick up a trophy, which was great. And what was particularly great about that is that the previous year I'd been number one for Custodes ahead of Vegas. Yeah. And then the new codex dropped right at the beginning of the year. New codex was legal for Vegas. Loads of people took it, and I got overtaken by one of the Americans. So this year I was very much like, no, I'm going to Vegas. I'm playing Custodes. Whatever happens, I'm going to try and hold on to that. And I did. So really pleased with that.
That can be a bit gutting, can't it? Because when you have a meta shift like that, because that book came out hot as well, didn't it? And so that sort of coincidence of just really big event, hot new book, someone who's been plugging away with them all year, that can be really frustrating and really difficult.
And it was really weird as well, because they came out at the same time as Gene Stealer Cults, which obviously
they did. About. Yeah, they did.
And in the weeks leading up to it, everyone was going, Gene Stealer Cults are going to be amazing, and look at all these tricks they have, and look at all this stuff they can do. And Custodes have lost Swooping Dive, and they've lost this, and they've lost that, and they're going to be rubbish. And everyone thought Custodes were going to be terrible. Gene Stealer Cult were going to be a sweet tournament, and then it couldn't have been further from the truth.
Complete opposite experience.
Gene Stealer Cult kind of whiffed, I think it's fair to say.
They really didn't do anything on
and
arrival.
Custodes was suddenly, came, were up in the top 8 in the top final cut in Vegas, were winning majors, and then took a pretty hard nerf not soon after that, which
No, completely right. And I think that was a classic experience of demonstrating how hard it sometimes is, especially to onlookers, to gauge quite what the raw power of something is going to be. Because as you say, it was so easy with the Custodes to focus in on some of the things that they'd lost, because they had lost some stuff, right? They'd changed the nature of how your saves work. They'd changed some of the quite fun tricks that they'd had in 8th edition. So I think people will really focus on that, but they hadn't appreciated just the raw sort of debuffing power of some of the new toys that were in that book.
Yeah, Swooping Dive was the big one. So obviously back in 8th, you could effectively charge almost kind of like a special heroic intervention, but it gave you almost up to a 12-inch heroic range with bikes, and you counted as charging, and it was super fight first. It beat even charging and fight first. And people were absolutely terrified of this. And suddenly that went away, and it was like, well, hang on, is this not one of the big tricks that you rely on? And actually it's one of those things that you never really relied upon. You hardly ever used it. It was only ever there as a threat. And a lot of the Custodes book works like that. It's things that you don't actually use. You just have to have it to be able to say to your opponent, I can heroic intervene, so you're going to stay this far away from me, and they will.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting segue into sort of the overall character and nature of Custodes as an army, right? Because I guess that again, certain things with them have stayed the same across editions, and they are this quite stoic, objective holding, combat centric kind of army, and it feels to me like they're quite a sort of control army in certain ways as well, right? With the various ways they can swerve your opponent's efforts to engage with them. But I guess for the listener, would you like to elaborate how you see them and their sort of ethos as an army in general?
So I think a control army is a pretty fair way of describing them. I've almost seen them in the past as kind of like a trading army, but as a very very elite trading army. You're not trading unit for unit; you're trading multiple units at a time, hopefully for one of yours. And I think the thing is that for me, Custodes have always been about some really critical point in the game. Your opponent puts a big charge in or a big effort in to kill a unit. You pop some strats, make some good rolls. One guy survives on one wound. It's always one wound. You've got an upset guy on an objective, and suddenly that's stuffed up your opponent's secondary. It's got you another 4 points of primary. That guy's scoring your primary for the rest of the game, and you can kind of put down 20-point swings in a game when you look back and you go down to that one guy surviving on one wound.
Yeah.
And a lot of people who've played Custodes will be very familiar with one guy on one wound.
Yes.
Always happens. But at the end of the day, Custodes, they're 50 points a model typically you're starting. So that one wound is worth 15 to 20 points. So it's still more than most models. So it's kind of, and that's the thing, they are a really elite army. Every model you lose hurts. When you're starting to roll 4-ups into damage 3 weapons, and you've got 5 dice to roll, and suddenly 4 of them come up as fails, that hurts. That slight variance swing. And the number of times I've had people shoot 3 melter guns, say, into 3 Custodes, and I've gone, this should be fine. They're not going to hit with them all, or they're not going to wound with them all. And even if they do, statistics says one guy survives because I shouldn't fail 3 4-ups.
Yeah.
And you do, and they all die, and that's a unit gone, and that was probably a throwaway set of shots, and suddenly there's an objective you're no longer holding because you don't have loads of units. It's not like, I've got a second unit I can now shove onto that objective. That was your flank, was those 3 guys. So it can be really punishing for that little variance in the dice. But at the same time, if they kill nothing, then that's some heavy firepower that's just not done anything.
Yeah,
so it can be frustrating both to you and to your opponent, really. Those 4-up saves.
Yeah, I always think the 4-up game is exactly like that, right? You have those games where it's just miraculous and it can turn whole games with how well it goes. You can also have games where you just can't make a 4-up to save your life, and it does make things a little bit swingy. That experience of sort of going into Custodes and that being how you lose the game, I'm very familiar with. They are one of those armies that eventually you feel forced into committing onto something. You're trying to get them off an objective, you're trying to kill a unit, and as you say, if you undercommit or you get caught out by the debuffs and the tricks, they have so many ways to turn that into their victory, right? They take your attack and they turn it into their counterattack, and they're very, as I say, they've got a really strong counterattacking and control game off the back of that.
Oh yeah,
which is a really interesting thing. How long have you been playing them for, Jamie?
So I used to play Guard. I've been a long time Guard player, and in fact, you ran into my Guard at
I did, yeah.
team tournament. And I, back in 8th, the way you could run Guard was you took mostly Guard, and then you took some Blood Angels characters, and you took 3 Shield Captains on bikes.
Yeah.
And you gave 2 of them 3-up in runs, and you ran around with these 3 pretty tough to kill dudes flying all over the board and having loads of fun. Yeah. So those were my first Custodes models. Okay.
Yeah.
And I then actually started playing Custodes as an army sometime into 9th, because it's no coincidence that the 3 armies I have are those 3 armies used to run. So the 3 main armies I collected: Guard, Blood Angels, Custodes.
Yeah.
So going into the beginning of 9th, Guard weren't in a great place.
No.
Blood Angels weren't in a great place. So I had these Custodes models. I had some more stuff that I'd sort of picked up at around the same time in case I ever wanted to build a Custodes army. And so I went, okay, let's go for it. They felt like they were in an okay place. They weren't top of the meta, so I wasn't worried about them getting knocked down to a really bad place anytime soon. They placed all right. They seemed like they were fun to play. Small model count was attractive.
Yeah.
I'm not the world's best painter, so small model count's always a win. And yeah, so I guess I can't remember exactly when that was, but that would have been about when tournaments opened up as we came out of COVID. Was when I started, and it was like London Open in, I guess, 21 probably, that I was the first sort of event I took Custodes to. And I love the play style, and I kind of, Custodes have what have taken me from being like a player who would reasonably expect to go 3-2 at an event to now probably more consistently 4-1 and push for 5-0. That's kind of my history with Custodes. I've been playing them almost exclusively since that point in about 2021.
Yeah, I was going to say, because obviously, you're one of those names, as you say, you do well, and the name pops up, and I've obviously we're always looking over how people are doing and what they're running, and you and Custodes have been inseparable for most of sort of the post-pandemic sort of years, really, right? It's been them in lots of different forms. Dreadnoughts have come and gone, bikers and troops, different builds, and so I think you're really well placed to sort of explain to the listeners the ways in which they have evolved and continue to evolve, which is obviously something we're going to try and do today. So I think let's start there. Let's think about the shift into this new era, this Arcs of Omen meta that we're currently in. What did you, as a Custodes player, obviously you've just come off the back of running them, you've got a new season in front of you. As you see it, what have been the key sort of things influencing the changes in the way Custodes have started to play and the way they're being used now in Arcs of Omen?
So the thing about what happened between Nephilim and Arcs for Custodes is that if you forget about the meta around them, Custodes got strictly better. And I think they're probably one of the few armies that got strictly improved. Space Marines got lots of improvements in points, but they lost Armour of Contempt. Admech, I guess, got strictly improved, but you don't really see them.
No, that's true.
So Custodes got strictly improved, and what they got is they got back OBSEC on non-troops. They didn't get it back on characters, but they got it back on all their infantry that wasn't characters. There were some slight changes to, I think some of the Sisters of Silence units got 5 points cheaper. That wasn't a big deal. And they got back their ability to use multiple times per game two pretty key strats. One being Emperor's Auspice, which turns off all rerolls against the unit for a phase. And for Emperor's Chosen, their trait-specific strat, which lets you become another shield host for a command phase to command phase, that had previously been nerfed to once per game, and that came back to being as many times as you like, as you had command points for. And so it's not that anything that you took in Nephilim has got strictly worse. It's that other stuff has come and overtaken it, but also the meta has changed around it. There's Space Marines now have 1 million melter guns, and
they do,
dreadnoughts you can only make so many 4-up invuns or 5-up invuns on your dreadnoughts, and at the end of the day, a D6 plus 2 damage weapon is gonna hurt even with -1 damage, even with a 6-up feel no pain. And so I think we've had to sort of move away from that, but also the fact that suddenly we've got so many more options. So like you look at Wardens are a really great example of a unit that were great for a bit because they've had the old bodyguard rule, and I think they're defensively they're strictly better than the other sort of book troops choices. They then got the double nerf of the bodyguard rule became pretty irrelevant, and especially to Custodes that already had a slightly improved base character protection rule, and they lost OBSEC. So suddenly there was now this point where there was absolutely no point in taking Wardens. You would strictly take normal Custodes Guard or Shield Guard over them. And then suddenly they've had OBSEC back, and now actually they've flipped back to suddenly now I would say they're better than those, and that's kind of all it took to flip between the correct unit to take, the worst unit to take, the correct unit to take.
Because they have a 6-up feel no pain Wardens, don't they?
They do, and
which just throws off multi-damage so badly.
It's so important against damage 3 because it's just that ability to no sell. I mean, on average, it never works out this way. I hasten to add, I wish it did. But on average, it should take 2-3 damage shots to kill a warden.
Yeah.
Versus 1 to kill a normal guy on a failed save,
which is massive.
But they also get an extra attack, and they do have the bodyguard rule, even if it's not as good. So I mean, there are reasons to take them.
Yeah.
And then Terminators have come back. Venatari. Suddenly you've got units with a 12-inch move with obsec, and that's really interesting all of a sudden. So all these units that you kind of wouldn't really look very hard at before because they were just overshadowed, and it was like if you were going to take stuff that wasn't obsec, you might as well take dreadnoughts.
Yeah.
Now kind of comes back in, and so the army I've been running most recently has no dreadnoughts in, no bikes in, whereas before that was kind of what you were taking. So it has been a complete shift.
Yeah, so it's been a move really towards the foot infantry, who obviously all have so much more play with the obsec, breathes life into all of them, right?
And the thing is, it's because those things have got better, and that means that the army has got better going into arcs. We are in a better place in the meta now. Yeah. A lot of armies have got better going into arcs, so in some ways it's not all improvement over the meta, but I'd say we are. You'd see us higher up now, some sort of tier ranking of factions than you would have done back in Nephilim.
Yeah, I think being able to 1-2 the sort of defensive debuffs again, because this was a big part of what made that book so powerful on release, right? The ability to sort of essentially just shut down enemy efficiencies, force them onto big units that aren't going to be able to, you're not going to push sort of efficient damage through. And I think reviving that game for Custodes is essential. In a game that's become very destructive and very shooty, even since when they were last strong, I think being able to turn those things off is crucial, right?
Well, at the end of the day, if you park a unit down at toughness 5, 4 up invan, 2 up base, that's often not relevant, but if it is, it is. 3 wounds, 6 up feel no pain if you're taking wardens, and then the ability to put transhuman on them as many times as you have CP for, turn off all rerolls, hit, wound, and damage. That some units rely on that. You think about Space Marine Chapter Masters, Lightning Claws. Other factions obviously have huge reliance on rerolls in certain cases.
GSC certainly do. I played against Custodes the other day, and it hurts the seismic cannon shooting so badly.
It can be a real and it's they're not the only army that have a no reroll effect. Death Guard have had access to it for a while, but as I understand it, you have to construct your army quite specifically to get hold of that, and it's an aura, and it's not everywhere. And the ability for me to be able to just turn it on when I want it—that's
the killer thing.
That's the killer. And you get people with their Lightning Claw squads, and it's like, well, do they try and split them up with these Vanguard Vet squads into 2 different places and only activate it in one place, and it just forces people to play differently.
Yeah, it's that control dimension again, isn't it? Because again, your opponent's sort of being herded. You've got the power to herd them away from particular blocks because they see what look like obvious opportunities, and they know it's a trap. They know that their efficiencies are going to get cut off, and the lengths they'll go to get around it can sometimes just make armies behave in ways they don't want to behave as well.
And as I kind of said earlier, just because you don't get to use a strat doesn't mean it wasn't worth having. If your opponent plays differently, because you have something, they play in a way that they otherwise would prefer not to have done, or there's something else they would have preferred to have done and they're not doing it because of your strat, you've achieved an advantage.
It's massive. Yeah, and in my experience, what happens if you don't bite the bullet and get stuck in is all you're doing is the Custodes players just building up a big nest of CP for when it's even more important later on, right? They're like, you don't have to bite. I'm still going to be here and waiting, and I'm going to have even more CP for my defenses.
I played a game a couple of weeks ago at an event, and I got into double-digit CP.
Imagine having that back. That's so nice.
And, I'm starting. I think I was starting on 3 or 4 before the game began, and it was just 3 turns where I didn't spend a CP.
Yeah. And of course, you've got excellent regeneration with Trajan, right? He brings it back. You're one of the most sort of CP. I guess you've always got good access to it, which again, it's appropriate, right? They're elite units. They should always have access to their sort of command resources. But as I say, it creates this massive problem where those defensive debuffs, the intervention tricks, all of the various interrupts, all these different ways that punish you for engaging Custodes if you don't bite the bullet and try to engage them.
And
they just build up.
It's a big change because in Nephilim, I was taking Helverins with my Custodes, and I didn't care that I was spending 3 CP. I started the game with my sort of, as the Nephilim army I'd sort of come to, started on 0 CP because you didn't need them during the game. They were useful. You'd use them for occasional things where it was helpful. +1 to wound somewhere was nice, or exploding 6, or sorry, auto wounding 6s on your armigers or whatever it might be. But there was no way you really needed it. You like to build up some for an interrupt or for a heroic, but you didn't need it early doors. And now my current build, I think I'm starting on 3 or 4.
Yeah,
and I've explicitly cut back on relics that I'd really like to be taking, warlord traits I'd really like to be taking, in order to make sure that I start the game on a sensible number of CP, to be able to get some of those strats out the door turn 1, even if I'm going second.
Yeah. Because it protects you, right? It protects you in an environment that's often looking to sort of put you on the back foot straight away. It just means you're insured against those kinds of early offensives.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Yeah. I guess one point of curiosity I have is that it looks, as a casual observer, it looks like the actual shield host being run has diversified a little bit in Ark Survival, right? People are trying different things. And I guess I'm curious if you'd like to comment on sort of one or two of the new options that have sprung up and why you think they work and what sorts of things people are trying.
Yeah, so I mean, before until recently, Emperor's Chosen was sort of the go-to shield host.
It was almost always the one you saw, right?
And it's really interesting that is the shield host that has explicitly got better because its really good stratagem has got unnerved.
Yeah.
And yet these other options now feel even more viable.
Yeah.
And the reason for that is that, so there's 6 shield hosts, and a Kill and Shield and Dread host I kind of just don't rate. Unfortunately, I don't think they give you anything that you can't kind of get access to in other ways to the army. So you can kind of put them to one side in my view. And you're left with 4 shield hosts. And Emperor's Chosen and Shadowkeepers are both good shield hosts, and they will work with a random Custodes army. You can put together whatever Custodes units you have, and they will be good traits for that list.
Yeah.
The big thing that's happened is that you've got Emissaries, Imperatus, and Solar Watch. But the thing is, they're good, but they only work with certain builds.
Yeah.
And the builds that they work with tend to be infantry heavy.
Yeah.
So it's the fact that suddenly the infantry have got good again means that those builds are now viable.
Really amps them up.
You couldn't. If you took the dreadnought list, that some of the Americans were taking, like 9 dreadnoughts and Trajan and nothing else, and put that into emissaries. I mean, it's not terrible, but it's a waste of emissaries. There were better shield hosts to go into.
Yeah.
So those 2 shield hosts, you have to build for them, but the builds that you have to build for them are now better and good, critically. And so I think it's kind of Emperor's Chosen and Solar Watch up there fighting now for the best shield host. And I still say if someone said, I've got a Custodes list, I'm not going to tell you what's in it, what shield host should I go? I'd just say Emperor's Chosen. It's the safe option. It's a good option. But if you've built right for it, I think Solar Watch is really powerful at the minute.
What is it about Solar Watch that has brought it into competition, do you think? What tools is that offering you at the moment? So
the big thing about Solar Watch is that the trait-specific Warlord trait is basically that you can give an infantry unit advance and charge.
Very nice.
And it has to be infantry. Because bites with advance and charge would be
nuts.
And so suddenly you can now take a brick of 10 Wardens, 10 Shield Guard, whatever it might be, and advance and charge them. And Solar Watch are also getting +1 to advance and charge. They can double up on the Katars that let you roll 2d6, pick the highest for the advance. So you've got a brick of 10 Wardens that's moving 7 plus 2d6, pick highest inches, which is often coming out around 12 inches.
Yeah.
And then charging with +1.
Yeah.
As opposed to moving 6 and charging normally.
Yeah.
So that's massively increases your threat range by effectively about 7-8 inches. And they also have full back and charge, which is great, because the last thing you want with small units is occasionally if you whiff and you don't quite kill something and you're now trapped in combat and can't get into what you need to, and that can be really frustrating. So fallback and charge is great, it's really useful, but advance and charges is the thing that is I think really important.
Yeah, because it just helps. Okay, in a world in which you're scaling down on some of the quicker units, it makes sure that the foot guys can cover the board, and on those great big blobs of like 10 guys who count as 2 models each for objectives, that's so much mission play suddenly, isn't it?
And you can do it with Venatari as well. So
of course,
you can move them, you can advance them 12 plus, 13 plus 2d6 pick higher, so that's often, as I say, coming out to about 18 odd inches. And then charge, and that means you can legitimately get first turn charges off. You have to keep the guy with the warlord trait within 6 inches of them at the beginning of the charge phase. But the fact you don't have to be wholly within. I think you just have to be within. So you string them back, and you can legitimately get a first turn charge off. And on some of the missions where you've got objectives near the front of enemy deployment zones, you can legitimately take effectively a home objective off someone turn 1. And the Venatari aren't going to survive. They're not going to sit there forever, but you're starting to cause problems in your opponent's deployment zone turn 1. Yes. And that just lets you stage the rest of your army.
That's it. The rest of the army can close. No, that makes a lot of sense, and that certainly helps to explain one of the reasons that Venatari have made a comeback, right? Because being able to throw something in that's causing a lot of problems, again with an army that can say, well, you can get rid of them, but you're going to need twice as much stuff as normal because I'm going to make it twice as hard.
It's just a 12-inch move. I don't think you need to take them as Solar Watch. I would take Venatari now in an Emperor's Chosen.
Yeah, you'd still run them regardless.
Because they're OBSEC and they move 12. But when they're not OBSEC, this is the thing, is that Custodes small model count, you can't necessarily rely on killing the unit that you're charging in with things like Venatari or even bikes sometimes, against tough units, they won't kill it. But you're relying on killing enough, surviving enough, and outnumbering, counting as 2, to hold the objective. And you need OBSEC to be doing that in a lot of cases.
Absolutely. And obviously, you say that Emperor's Chosen remain really, really relevant and really useful. So do you want to sort of unpack the key things that make that so? I mean, they're obviously a more known quantity, but it's still useful, I think, to think about why those are still valuable. Well,
the reason Emperor's Chosen, the main reason I struggled in the past to move away from Emperor's Chosen is mortal wounds hurt. And Emperor's Chosen gives you a 4-up feel no pain against them.
Which is
the
amazing.
rest of the army gets a 6-up feel no pain, which is nice, but it's not the same. The big difference. You go up against Thousand Suns, Grey Knights, other armies that there's lots of other armies that do mortal wounds, and you don't kind of notice that they have it. But you think about things like Kazakin bombs now and stuff like that are spitting out mortal wounds, and suddenly having that 4-up feel no pain makes a big difference. And the reason mortal wounds suck is that each of our wounds as Custodes cost a lot more than a wound in a guard army.
Yeah, of course.
Wound in the guard army is 6 points, and a wound in the Custodes army is 15, 20 points.
You're just feeling that so much more.
So the fact that you can kind of halve that, and then suddenly actually it's 2 mortal wounds to do 15, 20 points worth of damage. Now it's kind of 7.5, 10 points per mortal wound. You're back on par with those guard or marines or whatever, which is where you want to be. So that's for me, that's the key reason for Emperor's Chosen. But there's other good things about them. The other half of their trait is what's it called? What people have commonly called Artisans of War.
the
1 wound, 1 hit or 1 wound reroll per activation on a small model count army. That's great. Bikes, you're doing 3 shots with missiles, hitting on 2s, often wounding on 2s or 3s. Kind of only need 1 reroll
so
often.
Efficient.
That's really big. And also their strat, I've kind of mentioned this before, it lets you put a unit into any other shield host's traits, command phase to command phase, which is brilliant. Often you're putting something into Solar Watch because that's where having on-demand access to fallback and charge is fantastic. In the past, back in the early days before it got nerfed, I would shove a unit down the board and put them into Shadow Keepers, for example.
Yeah, I know and hate that one. Yeah,
-1 attack in
it's
combat,
massive,
and it's like, well, if you want to
in a
charge,
trading game. Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
I'm blunting that charge.
Yeah.
So that's really great. Their Warlord trait isn't bad, Emperor's Chosen. It's probably not one I'd say now take, given the restriction, given you now want your CP and you have less CP. And like most of the relics, unfortunately, most of the Shield Host specific relics, it's not worth talking about. I don't even know what it does, but I know it's not good.
Yeah, sure. It's interesting. I mean, Relics and Traits is an interesting direction because, as you say, due to the new economy, as it were, of Arcs of Omen, it sounds like you've had to make sacrifices there. So I'm curious, as a Custodes player, what are the things that are still worth shelling out to take? What sorts of toys do you like to buy pre-game now that you think actually still bring a lot of value?
So, I mean, it's the new economy is kind of, it's Arcs of Omen for Custodes specifically. Obviously, we've had 6 CP about for a little while now. As I've kind of alluded to, you didn't really care pre-Arcs of Omen because you didn't need them. You were happy to spend all 6. Now you need to conserve them. So in that new economy, I guess, the useful things, Trajan pays for himself, and his Warlord traits are absolutely worth taking.
Yeah.
So, he gives you a CP, you spend it immediately to give him some Warlord traits. And I can never see a situation where I wouldn't want to do that. Other than that, I think I love Castellan's Mark. I think it is an absolutely fantastic relic, and I have put it in pretty much every one of my lists where I could fit it since the book came out.
And what does Castellan's Mark do?
So Castellan's Mark, and in fact, there was a version of this in the 8th book.
Oh, right.
It lets you redeploy now 2 Custodes units.
Yeah, that's massive. That's just
a small model count army.
Yeah.
And as you'll probably know, and some of your viewers will probably be aware, if you play it right, redeploying 2 units lets you effectively redeploy 4. Because in your head, if you think, okay, this is my plan for a defensive deployment, assuming I'm going second. This is my plan for an aggressive deployment, assuming I'm going first. If you put 2 units in those sort of aggressive stances, 2 units in the defensive positions, then you can switch whichever 2 units to suit, and you've effectively got 4 units worth of adjustability.
Yeah.
So I think that's a brilliant relic, and I take it all the time.
Yeah.
Obviously, if you're taking Solar Watch, Sally Forth is the Warlord trait, which is the advanced charge.
Yeah, very useful.
That goes without saying. Shadow Keepers have a couple of things that I think are really important. Shadow Keepers, Stasis Oubliette, I think, is Fight Last. Lock Warden ignores invulns against characters, which is really great on a character killer. So if you're kind of leaning into Shadow Keepers, I think you probably want to be paying for some of those traits.
Yeah, they still bring a phenomenal sort of melee shutdown game, don't they? They're very good at specifically that, but maybe not quite as flexible as some of the others.
Yeah. And then, I mean, one of the things I had in my Nephilim list, and I'd love to do, but I just can't afford the CP at the moment, is I love the Blade Wizard, Blade Champion, of course.
Shiny Geralt. Yeah.
you put a 5-up Feel No Pain on him, and you give him the Eagle's Eye, which is a relic for a once per game single phase 3-up invuln at a point where you take a save. So you can wait until you have to take the save, see how many saves you're going to take, and declare it.
Super.
And that just lets you, with him, completely no sell. I mean, pretty much anything up to Be'lakor. Once you've put no rerolls on him, transhuman on him, he intrinsically has trans hitman. So I mean, you can basically survive anything. Be'lakor might get through, but anything else isn't. And then you've completely no sold something, and then he hits back like a truck. So so that's kind of useful. I think you can survive without those things on him. You just have to be a bit more careful with him. He won't. Without those relics on him and Relic and Warlord trait, he won't survive quite as much. But he's still a Custodes character. He's still got a 4-up invuln. He's still got a truckload of wounds.
No, he's absolutely awesome, and it's also a lovely model, right? It's just a really fun piece to have out, the Blade Champion. I think sorry, after you. I
was just going to say the only other Warlord trait I think I would take at certain points in the meta, but maybe not right now in the meta. So I used to take Impregnable Mind, which is a single +1 to your roll deny on a character. So character can
Yes.
deny with +1. And
Yeah.
that was really useful because the number of times that you had players with a little bit of psychic smattering in their army come and ask you, do you have any denies in your list? And if you said no, they would just take Warp Ritual or Mental Interrogation. And as soon as you told them you had a +1 deny, they either wouldn't take that secondary, or they would, and you'd probably deny it.
Yeah, they're not having it all their own way. Yeah, absolutely.
And that made a big difference. So just having that somewhere is great. But right now, with the way they've changed Mental Interrogation, the way that psychic heavy armies generally aren't doing so well, I just, as a meta choice, I don't think I'd spend the points on it.
No, absolutely. I think that's right. I think psychic shenanigans and mortal wounds to a lesser extent as well are a little bit on the down, which I think is what's freed up this experimentation. Right?
I think that's really true.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, we're heading towards the meta now, and I think this is where I'm really interested to pick your brain, because obviously, as we've sort of alluded to, Custodes are in a strong place where things have improved, but they are also in a meta where a whole bunch of other stuff has been juiced up and lots of other things have been thrown into the mix. So I'm curious, maybe if you want to elaborate a little bit on a couple of the sort of the good matchups, the threats out there that you think Custodes have good play into and why that is, and maybe one or two of the challenges as well.
Yeah. So my experience on this is, especially in Arcs, is a little bit more limited. The last event I was at, I ended up playing against Custodes 3 times out of 5.
Oh my word!
So I'm very experienced in the mirror match right now. But in terms of like anything else, not so much.
Yeah.
But I mean, a lot of the historic things that we're good against, we're still good against, and a lot of the historic things we're bad against, kind of probably still not great against. So Gene Stealer Cult is something Custodes have historically had quite a good matchup into.
Okay,
we turn off quite a lot of the specific tricks. I'd still take Gene Stealer Cult as a good matchup. Dark Angels has always been one of the most frustrating matchups for me because I'm used to hitting things on 2s and wounding things on 2s, and as soon as you tell me I can't do one of those 2 things, I get quite angry. And as soon as, they've got this, Raven Wing, and you can't hit it or whatever it is.
And the -1 damage banner is a real pain as well for all your damage too.
Anything with -1 damage is a big problem for a lot of Custodes builds, and it's why I was taking Helverins in the old build, and I'd still absolutely consider them, because 3 damage is so much better than 2 damage. And I saw people saying, oh, well, Helverins and Caladius isn't doing the maths, they work out about the same against all these different targets, and I'd go, what happens if you add -1 damage into the mix? Because that's why you're taking the 3 damage Helverins, and that's why I was paying 3 CP for them back in Nephilim, was because against -1 damage, 3 damage is over twice as good as 2 damage.
Yeah, absolutely.
So anything with -1 damage is a problem. Death Guard, therefore, can be a bit of a struggle, but they're not in a great place. So
they're not that common right now.
You can generally push through it. Redemptor Dreadnoughts suck, as I discovered recently. As we said, Dark Angels. Harlequins are probably still tricky. They're fast, they're hard to hit. They don't play the 4-hour pin run game anymore, but they still play an in-run game. Those are the things that we probably struggle into. As I say, Gene Stealer Cult we're good into. Marines generally we're quite good into. Dreadnoughts aside, because we have the perfect Marine killing profile. AP3 damage 2 is generally the name of the game with Custodes, which is what you want against Marines.
Exactly.
What else would I be happy to see? Depending, if you've taken like a more balanced Emperor's Chosen list, Knights are typically okay. You can normally outbody them. You're great in combat against them.
And they kind of have their secondary game kind of demands that they come near you as well, right? They sort of have to come to the middle, which is your territory.
Emperor's Chosen lets you double up on Rendax, which is basically the vehicle monster killing Couture. So it lets you get 2 turns of every 6 to hit auto wounds, and that's obviously really big. And you've just got access to strats and stuff that can help you get through Knights. So you're quite survivable into them because they typically have low shot output, and the way to kill Custodes is you make them take lots and lots and lots and lots of saves. You don't make them take exactly the number of saves that would kill them, because I promise
That's
you, if you do it,
yeah.
You know, I had a roll the other weekend. You know, I had last weekend. I had the situation where I lost the 3-man unit to the 3 shots, and then in a different game, I rolled 9 4-up saves and made them all. And it's just like you can't legislate that. But
yeah,
you know, it's yeah.
Yeah, very nice. And in terms of sort of particularly challenging matchups, is guard an issue? Where do you feel? I mean, so you know guard very well. Is guard a problem for him?
I don't know. I haven't played. The thing is, I haven't played that matchup, so I'm not 100% certain. I don't think it's great because they have a lot of damage tree, and damage tree isn't really what you want to be seeing. I feel like, so if I was going to come up against it with my Solar Watch build that I've been trying, I feel like I'd maybe be okay. It really comes down to, you probably end up at some point parking your army in the center of the board, and the guard army either blows it away or it doesn't.
Yeah.
And I haven't really run the maths on that. But I think it would come down to that a little bit. You know, certain things that guard are a bogeyman for, but you don't care about. You don't really care about the fact that you can't deep strike within 12 inches of them if they want, and you don't really care. I mean, their combat is just a complete non-issue. Their shooting output obviously hurts. So, but then again, you know, you think about the plasmas. You know, they're AP4. Anything above AP2 is kind of wasted against you. The perfect profile into Custodes is AP2 damage tree, otherwise known as an Armature Helverin. So, or they're AP1, AP2, but whatever, they're really good. So guard is interesting. It's something I need to try. Something I need to see how it
goes. For sure. I'd be interested to see how it goes. Again, it feels like they have certain things they rely on, which, again, your debuffing definitely hurts. And as you say, it probably does come down to being able to take a hit on the way in and then do a huge amount of damage.
But something actually I'd say is really critical to the matchup, and it's a kind of topic in and of itself, is secondaries. So guard
that's exactly where I was going to go next.
Guard have good secondaries. Lots of armies have good secondaries. Custodes do not have good secondaries.
And so that's a really interesting point, because this has been true pretty much the whole time in 9th, hasn't it? Since they came through. And I guess I'm curious again. You're an expert with the army. Secondaries are a bit of a weak spot. What kinds of options do you have, and how do you mitigate that as Custodes player?
So Custodes, obviously, like everyone else, they have 3 secondaries. One of them I have never taken. It is, as far as I'm concerned, absolute trash. It is, I can't even remember the full name of it. It's basically a worse version of Grind, where you have to kill a unit with Custodes and not have any Custodes unit die.
Right.
So it's incredibly binary. And for having achieved this, instead of getting 3 points, you get a magical 4 points.
Okay.
So if you're going to take it, you just take Grind, and you've at least, you know, you can kill 2 units and have 1 die in return. So that's never taken that. That's useless. And to be honest, that sort of, I can't remember the name of that secondary group, but that No Prisoners Grind group is typically the one that you don't have a problem with as Custodes. That's normally the one that's fine. Custodes then have a secondary called Auric Mortalis, which is you pick your opponent's Supreme Commander, or if they don't, as a lot of armies don't have one, their most expensive unit, and you get 5 points if they're dead, 10 points if you kill them in combat, 15 points if you kill them in combat outside your deployment zone. And that basically comes down to what your opponent's eligible unit is going to be. Against something like the Silent King, I've taken it to quite good success, because if they want to hide him at the back, they'll hide him at the back, and then he's not doing useful things.
It's just a linchpin unit like that has to come and play, doesn't it? Otherwise, it's not.
I've once made the mistake of taking it against a unit where I kind of was like, oh well, the opponent, if they don't want to play with that unit, they don't want to play with that unit. But then they didn't play with that unit. I was kind of like, actually, you know what? I'd have rather they came and played with this unit of the unit of Blood Angel Death Company, and I could have dealt with that rather than it sat at the back of the board and then for the last couple of turns bounced up and down for 2 turns just to deny me the points on that secondary.
Yeah, for sure.
And then the last Custodes one is Stand Vigil, which is kind of, at first glance, it's a bit like the old Stranglehold, which is great. You have to control more of the objectives in neither player's deployment zone, but here's the kicker, at the end of the battle round.
Right.
So there are situations where if you go first, you will score 0, and if you go second, you will score 15.
Yeah.
And it's that binary.
Too much variance. Yeah.
The with the Solar Watch builds and with the big infantry heavy builds, I have been taking it a bit more because you can actually park yourself a bit more on the centre with these big
put a full
blobs.
strangle on the objectives,
And,
don't you?
and you can sort of go, well, either I'm going to manage it or my opponent's going to have to commit in a way that they don't want to commit.
That's when it becomes a strength, right? That it forces them to throw so much stuff to try and stop it from happening.
And then you can play the game of I hold the centre and no further and I don't need to come further. So what are you going to do about it?
Yeah.
So those are the 3 Custodes ones. Obviously, so one of the really important things about Custodes is that we don't tend to give up a lot of secondaries.
No.
So, I mean, you think of my Solar Watch army gives up a little bit more. If you think about my Nephilim army, I think I had 2 characters in it. I gave up like 7 points or something for Bring It Down. I gave up like 6 points for No Prisoners. There was just no good picks in it. For people to take, and so against another army that relied on you giving up some secondaries in order to pick their own secondaries, something like often Tyranids or something like that, they'd really struggle. But if you came up against something that was like, I don't care what you're doing, I am picking these 3 secondaries, it really doesn't matter to me, I can score them. Harlequins or Guard to some extent, kind of didn't really matter. And I think that's where the big difference between faction secondaries comes in, is that some factions, their secondaries, it depends what your opponent's taking as to whether or not it's a good pick. And some factions, they just don't care.
No, they're just going to do their thing. And that can be really tough, I think.
I mean, obviously going into arcs, you've got things, behind enemy lines has got better.
Yeah.
Single Terminators have got better. Those 2 things in combination become interesting.
Yeah.
But good players can screen out there.
It's so army dependent, isn't it? There's some armies that have to leave the space, but there's also plenty that don't. Like that's
And again, I've definitely seen cases where I've scored, someone took behind enemy lines against me. I made them score virtually a 0 on it. I think they might have got 3. I think they got 1 unit in at one point during the game. And they were going, oh, that was a bad secondary pick. And I was going, well, it kind of wasn't. It wasn't. Yes, you didn't score well on it, but I played so differently as a result of having to leave those units to protect bits of my deployment zone. Otherwise, I wasn't really bothered about that unit dropping in my back corner. It wasn't a big deal to me. But that I played differently, and probably in hindsight, maybe I should have actually just come forward and let you have it. So I'm not sure it was necessarily a bad take against me in that respect.
Sure.
But obviously that's got good for us, is that you can take these single Terminators, and if they leave a space, you drop them down. With the fast army like Solar Watch and Venatari becoming good again, this is all the things that link together, all these different
it all starts combining.
Enemy lines works again. And the thing is it great as a secondary for you? No, because you haven't got a lot of units. But with Custodes, you're struggling with the secondaries a lot of the time anyway. So you've got to take what you can get, and you've got to go for something you can consistently think you can get 8 points on. Yeah. And the thing about Custodes is that you're not typically winning 100 to 80 something. No. You're normally winning 70 to 50.
Yeah, it's a primary strangle, isn't
your opponent's score. I've both in primary and often in secondary. If they're having to take things that rely on killing you.
Yeah.
So, and the thing is that does have its downside. You struggle to place well within brackets in tournaments, or I do anyway, because I often play that sort of low scoring style. So even though I'm winning the number of games I'm winning, I don't score the battle points, which is the most common tiebreaker in tournaments. But it is what it is.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess that's covered most of the ground I wanted to cover. But one area of Custodes where I am no expert, and I am very curious to get your thoughts, is the Catars, actually, because obviously this is like the sort of a secret source element, which again I think with really good play becomes a really powerful part of the game plan. But I was curious what at the moment in Arcs, what your sort of favoured kind of sequencing and use of Catars is in a game.
So the way I normally do it is Callistus, which is the one that lets you roll 2d6 for your advance and pick the highest in one half of it, and in the other half it lets you advance and shoot without penalty. That's almost always going in there, probably as pick one, because the ability to push forward, get onto objectives with a bit more consistency, is really important, and that's extremely important in Solar Watch. But even in Emperor's Chosen, just the ability to push into corners on the sort of those standard 5 objective layouts, and or quarters and that kind of thing, it's really good, that being able to consistently make a 9-inch advance as opposed to, or better keep you still want to keep a CP, but you get there with a bit more consistency.
Yeah, for sure.
That's often in there. If I'm relying on any sort of action-based secondary or sometimes even action-based tertiary, as people call it, the bombs mission, take on their icons, then I like to have, I think it's Custodes, I think it's called, in the stack somewhere, often at the end of the stack, which lets you fall back and do an action, so fall back or advance and do an action is one half, and the other half is shoot and do an action. And that's great, if you've got Sagittarium that are sitting on your back objective and you want to be shooting with them, but also raising a banner in early doors. So sometimes that then can make its way to the front in certain scenarios. That can be really useful. But then at the end, to be able to fall back onto an objective, especially if you're going second or something, and put a banner up for that extra point, or put a bomb down or whatever it might be, that can be great. And then the third one, or sometimes the other two, if you're not taking Custodes, is really down to what the matchup is. So Rendax is great against vehicles and monsters. If your opponent doesn't have vehicles or monsters, it doesn't come out. That's probably the other one where I go, is it in, is it out? I mean, other than that, you're kind of going, do I put Captaris in to turn off melee rerolls? We're against Space Marines that are getting lots of melee rerolls. That's probably a really good thing in to have there for like one turn of, no, you're not rerolling any hits against me. The fallback thing, I don't like to rely on it, but it can occasionally be useful. But I don't like relying on a 50% chance.
No, I think that's the thing. As a former Witch player, I can tell you it lets you down whenever you need it to do.
Especially against Fly, where it's less than a 50% chance. I'm like, you know what? If I can put it out in a great turn, then, and I can't think of anything better to do, then sure. But it's not there. And then Dakatarai gives you better. Well, it reduces your opponent's pile-ins and consolidates. That can be useful, but it's not often crucial. The other half of it is that you can reduce all your damage by 1 on melee, reduce down to damage 1 in return for an extra attack. That does occasionally go in the stack against minus damage armies, because you know what, if you're going to be damage 1 anyway, let's at least have an extra attack per dude.
Completely.
But those sort of M1s are kind of, they're going in where I can't really think of anything I really want in there, and I'll put them in the stack, and I'll, if they come up at the right times, then great. But you've got I take Trajan. I've never run Custodes without Trajan since I got them.
I don't think anyone has since that
I kind of assume you have Trajan in your army, and Trajan lets you shuffle about your Catars at any point into a different order. So you kind of want to think about what order you're likely to want them in. This is why I often think the advanced one is normally at the front of the stack, because it's normally, in some situations where I'm going first or second, it's often the one I want anyway.
Of course.
And then sometimes I'll switch to Conspire and sometimes I won't, and it depends what's going on and what the mission is, and so on. And of course, you do also have the ability, there is a strat, and I think actually I lied when I talked earlier about 2 strats that they unnerfed and made not once per game, and I think this one had been nerfed and then also got unnerfed. Okay. It's the ability to put a unit into a different Qatar stance from the rest of the army, and it could be one you've already done, and so that can be useful for things like Conservi, sort of, I want this one unit only to advance and do an action, because sometimes you only need one unit to be doing it, so the rest of the army can be in something else. That can be really great, or that's probably the one where it gets used most often for me, because everything else is kind of, it's not transformational, it's just good.
Yeah, absolutely. No, that makes sense. And I think it's one of those toolkits, isn't it? Where, as you say, using that well and flexibly, I think can really level up the power a little bit of Custodes. And yeah, they're in an interesting spot. It sounds like there's definitely some good news, but there are still certain things that make it a bit of a battle. You've still really got to shut the opponent down, make sure they can't do what they want to do. But that new life has been breathed into all of the infantry. Really exciting.
Yeah.
Jamie, thank you so much. Thank you so much for coming on. I wondered if you wanted to have any plugs, any teams you might like to shout out for. I realise we hadn't done that yet.
As you'll see, I am as contractually required wearing my War Masters stash. As you'll know, I play for the War Masters. We're one of the teams in the UK that are doing pretty well at the moment.
A fantastic team. Yeah.
Really great group of guys to play with. So shout out to all of them, and you can follow us on all our socials. I think we're basically at Warmasters UK on Instagram and Facebook and whatever else social media nonsense that exists.
Fantastic. Yeah, no, it's good. I follow it, and it's good fun. And War Masters are one of the institutions in the UK now. Really, I'm nagging James and Nas about coming on to do a sort of history of the team at some point. I want to make a sort of teams focused series, and I'd love to learn about the sort of the origins and the history of the team. So maybe we'll have you back for that when it's time. That'd be lovely.
I'd love to come back.
All right, thank you so much, Jamie. We will call it there. Thank you very much to everybody for listening. Watch out for the Golden Boys; they're out in force. Watch out for those big bricks of infantry; they're coming for you. And we'll see you all again soon. Bye bye.